What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry and Danny. What's up, Danny?
Chilling, I guess. I don't know. Not really.
Yeah.
How about you?
I wouldn't say I'm chilling. I wouldn't use the word chilling as per usual.
No, not today.
Definitely not chilling. It is a scary world.
Yep.
It is a very scary world. I'm actually kind of disoriented by everything that's happened in the past couple of days. And, right now we're recording this on October 9th. So we're, 2 days after the Hamas terrorist attack in Israel?
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of an emergency episode. We were planning on doing a follow-up to, the lead up to World War II on the Eastern Front. But, this came up and it seemed more pressing. And since we covered the Israel-Palestine conflict a lot in our years podcasting, it felt weird not discussing it. So Here we are. And honestly, both of us much rather be doing a podcast on the World War II podcast that we were originally planning on doing. And I'm having a difficult time kind of processing everything because there's been a lot of jarring imagery, a lot of heartbreaking videos, and a lot of really, really insane rhetoric online, which is all leading up to like this kind of hazy period where you feel like, what's going to happen tomorrow?
Right.
But as of right now, the Israelis I do not believe they've moved into Gaza on the ground yet. But
not yet, no.
They are bombing it. And, I guess the recap, obviously, there was a tragic terrorist attack in southern Israel, close to the border fence. But I guess it happened that there was 12 towns that were occupied. And the casualty figure right now, I think the Israelis are saying there's somewhere around 800 dead, but there could be more.
Yep, about 150 to 200 captured.
Yeah. 150 to 200 captured. Some of those civilians, some of those are
soldiers,
IDF soldiers. Apparently, some are children.
Some aren't even Israeli. Some are American citizens. I think.
I think some of the Americans are Israeli dual citizens. They're serving in the IDF because there's a lot of Americans who serve in the IDF. But I'm really just trying to process this, and right now, and I'm kind of being careful about what I say because in moments like this, it's like the blood boiling is super high. And I'm also trying to, this is kind of like an exercise for myself to comprehend, process it and to comprehend, what the situation is going to be like. But I guess first observation, the amount of calls for like a full on genocide from like evangelical Christian Twitter accounts is crazy. I don't know if you've been on Twitter, but
I'm actually staying off of pretty much all social media for two reasons. One, I'm really not interested in seeing some of the more graphic videos.
There's heartbreaking stuff.
I've seen enough accidentally just in doing research on this because, I woke up Saturday morning and, me and my fiance were just, captivated by this. We were watching YouTubes and reading articles and putting on the news and trying to digest as much as possible, and I've seen more than my share, and I kind of don't want to see it. So that's reason number one why I'm not really trying to go on social media right now. Reason number two is exactly what you said, right? Not only am I seeing just absolutely ridiculous calls for what would amount to genocide, but also on the other side I'm seeing just very flagrantly supporting terrorism in general. And my first initial reaction was just absolute and utter disgust at what Hamas decided to do. And this is coming from someone who very clearly understands the history here. I know all about the oppression and the occupation of the Palestinians. And truth in advertising here, I say this a lot whenever we talk about the Israel subject. I'm half Palestinian. I wasn't raised Muslim. I wasn't raised by my father, who is the Palestinian in me. I'm only Palestinian by blood. But if you happen to look at my last name, you're probably going to think that I'm on that side. Just want to make that very clear. But the first thing that I thought when I saw the news was just absolute disgust for Hamas and absolute disgust for the methods that they decided to take in order to fight the oppressors. I just think it's wrong in every sense. We were talking about, many, almost like 2 years ago now, the start of the Ukraine war, understanding the context behind what was going on and understanding the grievances by Russia, I still thought it was wrong for them to invade. And in this case, I'm going to remain as consistent as possible, even though those are two completely different scenarios. I think it's wrong in every case to take human lives. I think it's wrong in every case, especially to take innocent civilians' lives. And the gruesome manner in which they were doing this is just absolutely abhorrent. And I kind of don't stand on any of these people's sides. I don't stand on anyone's side who is just outwardly declaring that it's okay to kill people in every case.
Yeah.
And that's what's, I think, the most frustrating part about this is because it's hard to get a straight understanding of a solution that would work without entertaining the idea that people will die.
Obviously, when you're hit by a terrorist attack, the tension is extremely high. And after 9/11, I think everyone, especially New York, but pretty much across America, was like, all right, we need to make these Muslims pay. That was the general mentality. There was no distinction between like, oh, well, it was a complicated thing with Osama bin Laden. Because I think the cases, people are saying this is Israel's 9/11.
Yeah, a lot of people are saying that.
I think this is kind of comparable in a lot of ways to
multiple fronts.
Basically, this Hamas attack is a blowback attack. And that's my view of it. It's a blowback attack. And going down to, when the Israelis essentially fostered the development of Hamas as a predominant political institution, Hamas was a bulwark to the PLO.
Right.
So
to the secularists,
they actually fostered that.
Gaza.
The secularists in the 1970s, the main enemy of Israel, they weren't the religious fundamentalist. It was the secularist, the secular rebel groups like the PLO, who were more aligned with the Soviet Union. There used to be kind of a preference for Hamas, and Hamas started off as a Muslim Brotherhood charity group, essentially.
Right.
And, the Israeli government let them kind of set up shop and
they were creating schools and institutions. As a matter of fact, one of the schools that they created, oh man, I'm forgetting the name of the university they set up, but it happens to be right now one of the main targets that Israel hits every now and again because they say it's a Islamist hotbed, which it is legitimately, but these were one of the things that were built and set up, in cooperation with the Israeli forces who at the time were governing it, right? So they were in Gaza, governing Gaza. They had they had that presence there. They hadn't yet pulled out of Gaza. That only happened when 2005, right? 2005 was when Israel pulled out of Gaza, and then 2006 or 2007 is when Hamas got voted as the governing body there. But anyway, I digress. Kind of pulling back, there was an Israel presence controlling the Gaza Strip, and they preferred this new organization that was led by Ahmed Yassin, right? So there's this the vying political factions inside of Gaza at the moment. This is again under the total occupation and governance of Israel was between Yasser Arafat's Fatah organization and this other guy whose name is Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, and this is a crippled, half-blind cleric, who, at the time wanted to create, some charities and help benefit the people in Gaza, or at least that was the front that they were putting on at the time. And important context here, I believe this was around the same time that it was illegal to actually meet with or speak with any people who were involved with the PLO. Like that was an actual law that the Israel government could not actually have correspondence, could not communicate with those entities. So in order for them to establish like somewhat normal relations, they had to go to anyone else. And one of them that sprung up out of a lot of this was Sheikh Yassin. And,
he was jailed by the Egyptians prior. So prior to the 6-Day War, he was in an Egyptian jail.
Right.
And the Israelis released him after the war.
Mm-hmm.
And they released him with really the goal of him financing, being kind of an intermediary between Saudi Arabia and other Islamist groups in Gaza. So that's kind of like the origin of where Hamas comes from.
That's right. And the crazy thing about this is that, eventually when this group becomes Hamas and gets a bit more, unruly for the Israeli tastes, they do end up arresting him in Israel. And it was through, I believe, one of those prisoner swaps that they were able to get him back. And he came back basically like a hero. And this is when they basically all took off in terms of when Hamas took off as the alternative to the PLO or the Fatah in Gaza. And till this day, I mean, a lot of the Hamas people follow the teachings of Yassin. As a matter of fact, they named their rockets Yassins, so after this guy. He was a very radical Islamist, 100%. He definitely wasn't a friend of Israel, even though he somehow convinced them that he was worth investing in and allowing to be there. But the context behind that isn't that he was just this smart guy that duped them. The context behind that is that Israel needed to thwart the secularists, the Fatah organization in Gaza, who had been very powerful and had been, had a lot of public sway in Gaza. And I mean, this is like the 70s. I mean, at the time, this is when the MO was go after the communists at all costs. And in the Middle East, unfortunately, the easy way to do that was to get the Islamists to go against them. Yeah.
The Israelis used to use the Islamists to beat up the communists up, or the Arab nationalists up. If there was like a rally, they would kind of outsource muscle to the Islamists. And this is a time where, you have to look at the conditions of the Cold War. The secularist socialist types like the PLO, they had that outside state sponsor of the Soviet Union. So that was a much bigger threat. But now, and here's something, I kind of want to bring this back to modern days. There is a claim, and this claim doesn't really have any evidence behind it, that Iran is kind of running things, and this was an Iranian attack on Israel. I'm sure if you look into finances and how Hamas is getting money, I'm sure there's Iranian money back in there. I would be surprised if there wasn't. However, the way that it's being painted is that this was essentially like an Iranian coordinated attack. Hamas, being that its origins was that it was essentially a charities type patronage network, they get funding from Islamists around the world. They get charitable donations. And a lot of the weapons that they have, they're coming from, first and foremost, a lot of them are repurposed, bombs that have landed in Gaza. So they repurpose weapons, they repurpose tanks, they repurpose armored vehicles, they repurpose
Toyota Hiluxes.
They repurpose, destroy. Everyone there is basically a civic engineer, and they are also getting things off the black market. And just think about what's going on in Ukraine, the amount of weapons and arms that are being flooded out there. A lot of those weapons are not accounted for. You have to think that all these weapons that are on the black market are coming back and getting into the hands of people we would not want to have those weapons. And I would be surprised if there weren't weapons that were coming from the front or being delivered as aid in Ukraine, which is another form of blowback. But it's just without evidence. This is being attributed to Iran, and maybe they did sponsor it. I don't know yet. We're going to see. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt or beyond a reasonable possibility that Iran was in coordination with it. What adds kind of credence to that is that Hezbollah clearly seems to have known, and if Hezbollah known,
Then Iran knew.
Iran knew.
I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that Iran knew.
Yeah,
their level of involvement is up for debate. I think I hate that the first reaction is that Iran did this, because I think it undermines this is going to be a weird thing to say. It undermines the motivations of Hamas to do this, as if to say Hamas didn't have. Jesus, this is going to be really hard to put out, so take this with a grain of salt. As if in the minds of Hamas, they didn't have justification to do this. I'm not saying they were justified, just saying that they believed they already had enough justification to be able to do this on their own without needing Iran to tell them to go do it. I don't think that's I think going straight to Iran on this one is kind of hard. But I did read a few things, and I think we should talk about like how this all happened, because this was a coordinated attack. I mean, you're going to see on every news outlet they're saying this was land, air, and sea assault on Israel, which is technically true. Although I think the land part was really the big, the land and rocket part was really the big, mover and shaker here. But the first thing I thought it was like, how the fuck do they pull this off?
Dude, that fucking glider was insane.
The hang glider.
The hang glider. It looked like something out of Grand Theft Auto.
Okay, so this was the first thing that jumped out at me about that, actually. And I did a little bit of research on this, and it was actually really hard to find, because right now, you just type the word "I" in Google, and it's already giving you a million Israel, what's going on in Israel. So finding this was incredibly hard. So I found a article from a website I've never heard of called L'Orient Jour, the Orient Journal. I don't know the veracity of this stuff here, but take it with a grain of salt. This is literally the only thing that would actually talk about these fucking paragliders, because it's a ridiculous sight, right? You see these I saw a video of like what looked like 50 of these paragliders flying over. And they've got each two people on them, one guy flying, one guy holding a gun in the front. So we're talking about a max of 100 people, but that's still 100 people flying over the fence. And it just seemed so ridiculous, because I thought to myself, it's not a bicycle. You don't just get in one and immediately know how to drive one of these things. You have to have trained to do this. And that raises so many questions. Like, how the fuck did you learn how to do that? And so this article,
where do you get the airspace to do that? You need some flight lessons, right?
Yeah, you need training. You need training for this. And so let me get to the content of this article, because it's fucking fascinating. And again, I don't know how good this media is, but at least it helps me start to think about this in a relevant way. So they speak with 3 different people. They speak with 2 military experts from Lebanon, and 1 paragliding expert. That's apparently, he asked for anonymity because he didn't want to get the sport involved in the politics of this all. But they needed an expert to talk about how do you fly these things. So the first Lebanese military experts, he tells L'Orient today that they had to have received their training outside of Gaza, meaning that they must have gone outside of the Strip to get that training, which that's the first thing that makes the most sense to me, because I refuse to believe in many ways that they were flying around in Gaza training for this and nobody noticed. But we'll get back to that point. It still is a little bit hard to believe that they got enough people out of the Gaza Strip. They smuggled enough. Those borders are fucking heavily guarded, right? It's not easy to get people out. And there were a lot of people flying those goddamn paragliders. So, I don't know, a couple dozen people escape Gaza, go learn how to, fly a kite. I don't know, Lebanon, maybe somewhere else. I don't even know where they would go to learn this, right? That would be safe for them. Lebanon is the closest place that I can think of. So they go and learn that stuff. And not only do they get back into Gaza, but they also have to bring all that equipment with them. All those hang gliders, Like, they didn't make that shit there.
They probably made that there.
I don't know, man. I don't think they did.
I mean, how hard is it to make a hang glider? I mean, I'm guessing it's hard, but given all the other shit they make,
but again, it's like, it's the training thing, right? Okay, so let's say
the training thing is more. I can see them
train
building
outside of Gaza, but then they come back and make it. What, they don't test any of them there?
Yeah,
right? Like, they just assume that it's going to work. No, I think they had to have imported it if that was the case.
Maybe that thing is like 30 years old. It goes back past the blockade.
Maybe, man.
That's
I don't know.
That's the only explanation, because there's stuff that they have
maybe.
there that probably came into that country pre-blockade, or maybe somebody built it.
If they built it, then they definitely have to have tested it, right?
Maybe they tested it before. Maybe they took training prior to the blockade.
I mean,
I don't know.
Look, I know.
I'm just playing devil's
trying to
advocate
make
right
sense
now.
of it, because it doesn't make any sense, and I get it. But like, a lot of those guys that were flying on there, they're all fucking young kids. Like, the average age of Gaza is 18 right now. 18 years old. So the majority of the Gaza Strip wasn't even alive pre-blockade. So it's really hard to believe that these people somehow got training at all in Gaza. They had to have been trained outside of Gaza, unless they were trained inside of Gaza. And that is something else, right? So, okay, here's the guy on the paragliding. The paragliding guy says, from a technical point of view, what we saw in the video doesn't work, as the fighters would have needed more space to land than what was visible in the video clips. And, he's saying also a typical paragliding journey could be sabotaged by a single bullet from the average handgun, which is true, right? I mean, it's
you don't need sophisticated air defense to knock that out of the sky.
It's a fascinating, shock and awe campaign, right? Like, to see a bunch of fucking terrorists flying around in paragliders, right? And it certainly is a great propaganda thing, right? And I'm not denying the fact that they actually crossed the border. That's abundantly clear, But, okay, you see these things flying over the fence. Where's the IDF to shoot them? Where's anyone to stop these relatively flimsy devices that an expert says would have been fairly easy to shoot out of the sky? That leaves a big question that I think a lot of people are starting to ask. It's like, how did this happen? And then the last thing is, and this is coming from, and this guy is actually named General Khalil Halou, who's a Lebanese military expert, and he says that he has read several leaked reports from Israeli authorities that their intelligence had actually seen the paragliding exercises being conducted by Hamas militants, but did not believe that Hamas has the capability of orchestrating such an operation, and that the paragliding technique would actually work. So, I mean, if this general guy from Lebanon is right, and he did read something like this, I feel like that's the most plausible explanation.
They just thought it was something stupid. They probably made fun of it. Like, look at these stupid Arabs with their dumb fan machines.
Right. There's no way that they can use this to hurt us in any way.
Yeah, that's probably the reaction, that it was just ridiculous. But I know it's perplexing that this was able, they were able to train and coordinate this, essentially like in bunkers and stuff, right? Like, that's where they're doing this, and that's where they're coordinating this.
According to Helu, they were out flying in the sky, and nobody ever did anything about it. But Helu does make a really good point here, and he's saying that the paragliding was a propaganda thing, right? Like, obviously they did need to cross over the fence, because there were there's a lot of places that were unreachable by foot during that siege, but that it was mostly set up as a PR thing for Hamas. Yeah. Like, look at us, we're fucking flying, right? And it kind of worked, right? Because you read any article, listen to any news coverage, all of them are going to tell you this was a coordinated multi-front attack from land, air, and sea. And the air part happens to be these things, right? But that he's also saying that that wasn't, even if they had 100 of these things, that's not the thing that was impressive or effective. What he points out is that there's 20,000 Palestinians that leave Gaza every day for work outside of the Gaza Strip. and they return dailies, right? So they're in and out every single day. It's a program that Israel had set up. And it's one of the few things that I actually appreciated, which was just like allowing people to work and make 10 times more than they would in the Gaza Strip. But it's such a small number of people, and they tightly monitor these folks. But that he's positing that, these folks were probably doing, geographic reconnaissance, right? Like figuring out the routes, figuring out where all the police stations are, figuring out where all the, military outposts are. And that's probably true. And I think this paragliding thing kind of is the fancy thing to distract you from the larger issue, which was that, this had to have been happening over a long period of time. And they do quote this guy from Hamas, Ali Barakeh, who is a member of the Hamas's leadership in Lebanon. And he told the article, the author, that in order to execute Al-Aqsa flood operation and send its gunmen via paragliders, it had to use the help of its allies and friends, which is interesting by itself. And then he also says, we have been planning for this honorable operation for 2 years. Okay, so let's take him at his word there.
Well,
They've
I guess
planning it for 2 years, and they have help, and they had help.
Well, so one of the, I don't want to say claim, but one of the reasons I've read that Hamas decided to do this now was that there was a settler issue at the Al-Aqsa Mosque where 800 Israeli settlers and like ultra-Orthodox settlers
On Thursday,
on Thursday, they stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque and they started performing Talmudic rituals.
Yeah.
And this was a response to that. But clearly this was something that wasn't out of the blue. When this happened...
And it's also the 50-year anniversary to the day of the prior...
That could be a coincidence, but I mean, maybe they decided, maybe they had this plan for a while and they were like, all right, let's do it now in response to this. But I mean, I don't know that there's not enough evidence to suggest that this wasn't a direct response. I mean, Hamas probably would have just came out and said that, right? If that was...
Well, I mean, they did so much. I mean, they said straight up that...
I mean, they'll tell you how they're feeling.
Right. No, they're not quiet about it. I mean, they said that the reason why they're doing this is I mean, they call it Operation Al-Aqsa Flood or Al-Aqsa Storm, depending on how the translation is worded. But it's literally centered around the actions that Israel has taken around Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, again, this is not a plan that you could just spin up in from Thursday to Saturday, right? They had to have been planning it for a while.
Yeah.
Quick
context. So this was the reason for when Hamas started firing rockets into Israel 2 years ago, in May of 2021.
That's right.
It was in response to the IDF or police units gassing worshippers in the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
I mean, the same shit happened this year too.
Yeah,
it also happened this year, and there's just kind of this negative trend. And again, I don't want to blame the victims here. Israel are the victims of an attack this Saturday. However, this is the context by which the people who are perpetrating the attack say is the reason why they're doing it. So it's impossible not to pay attention to it. Much in the same way when we covered, the Russia-Ukraine war, it's impossible to just ignore what Putin was saying as his justification, even though his justification is bullshit and isn't justified to do what he did. Same thing with Hamas. It's not justifiable to do what they did because of this, but this is the context.
Yeah, I'll take this one step further. So, I mean, the context of 9/11, there's context behind it. They didn't decide to smash planes into the Twin Towers
just because they
hate our freedom.
Right. That's
because they hate
ridiculous.
the Gap and they hate blue jeans. They didn't decide to do that because because of women driving. They did it because of U.S. foreign policy decisions, one of them being our support for Israel, our U.S. support to Israel, and the others being bases in Saudi Arabia and the sanctions regime on Iraq, which killed hundreds of thousands, 500,000 children.
Right, and
those were the reasons.
And this is perpetrated, again, coming back to the context, by a group that we propped
Finance. So there's a lot of similarities.
The Mujahideen, that was us. We set them up to fight the fucking Soviets in Afghanistan.
And Al-Qaeda.
We gave them the guns and we gave them the training. And we got blowback for it.
I know, and it's like there's suspicious circumstances around how are these guys training in the United States? How are these guys taking in flight schools in the United States? There was a significant, almost criminally negligent.
Criminally negligent.
That's the best way to put it. Because if it's not criminally negligent, then it was like, essentially, we let them do it to get a pretext like that. Like criminally negligent is the most generous way to say.
Seriously,
the most generous interpretation of
and it's not
U.S.
a good
intelligence
one.
in 9/11.
And it's not a good one. And I think in the days and weeks, and hopefully this doesn't last more than 6 days, like the last 6-day war. But in the days to come, we're probably going to find out about criminal negligence on the Israeli side. And I think just the one stupid paraglider thing is just the tip of the iceberg for this, because we're talking about just massive movement of hardware, massive setup, massive planning, and I'm hearing a lot military folks saying that these Hamas guys switched to pen and paper and like courier services to do their communications, and that's why they weren't able to pick up on like signal intelligence for something like this. And yeah, that's probably what they did, but I don't know. I think it's got to be some negligence, some criminally negligent ignoring of the terms. A lot of the things that are coming out so far, maybe Egypt told them already 10 days before. Maybe they saw some fucking paragliders flying around. What else did they miss? Right?
Well, it happens to us all the time. The Boston bombing. Yeah. The Russians told us that, hey, these guys, these brothers, they're radical. They're Chechen radicals. You need to surveillance these kids. They're going to perform a terrorist attack. And we were like, yeah, fuck you. And then they performed a terrorist attack.
Right.
And they killed and maimed people running in a marathon.
Right.
I don't know if this is similar. I mean, on the flip side, you hear people saying that the Israelis let them do this to
the Israeli government.
The Israeli government let them do this
because it wasn't the people of Israel that did this shit. And that is a theory. It's one that I refuse to believe.
I'm not talking about the people. I'm talking about the government.
Yeah, just saying it. I refuse to believe that one right now because it's just so hard to stomach the idea that so many people have died and will continue to die because of a political machination.
I don't believe that either. I don't believe that they essentially, this is akin to a false flag operation if you're letting a terrorist attack happen on your soil to achieve some political goal. I don't believe that was the case because there's just it doesn't even make, even if you're going to contribute the most Machiavellian motives to the Israeli government, it wouldn't even make sense because, right now it seems like there's kind of political and chaos. It really seems that the Israeli government is backed in a corner, which makes it so scary. And the reason,
which explains the veracity of the strikebacks right now.
Well, here's the thing, and this is what I suspect what the intention is, and of Hamas, and obviously that Hamas is not going to conquer Israel. Like anyone who thinks that is out of their mind.
Right.
What they're and honestly, Hamas is part of Israel when you think about it, because these are Gaza and the West Bank, the Palestinian territories. They're not separate states. They're part of Israel. They're annexed land. And annexed land because the occupations are permanent. These aren't... To say these are occupations is too generous, because the definition of an occupation is that it's not permanent.
You leave eventually.
You leave eventually.
Right.
These are annexations. So these are part of it. This is the same state, technically, right?
I think in general, the idea that they allowed this to happen is a conclusion that I'm not willing to go down just yet until there's more evidence that suggests this otherwise. Because, but I can see how people are positing this information, right? When you look at the absolute turmoil that is the fracturing of the government right now. There, before this event, it is kind of convenient that they now have a unity government. So that's one way that a lot of people are trying to make this theory have legs. But that's like hindsight 2020. Like looking backwards, you're trying to apply your theory, without any background context. It's interesting to think about, but there's not quite enough evidence for me to believe that is indeed the case. And also, if it is the case, it's a fucking stupid idea, because the outcome of this is that, I think Hezbollah, last thing I read, there was some fighting happening in southern Lebanon, that Israeli warplanes were striking targets in southern Lebanon. So there's a real prospect of Hezbollah getting involved in the fight in a more widespread way. There's an off chance that Iran gets involved, but that's not typically their MO. They typically just like to support proxies for their endeavors there. I just don't think it would have been a smart move. I refuse to believe that they're that stupid that they would think that would be helpful for them. I just don't think it. Think
about this. This is like the reason why this is such a bad situation, or one of the. There's many reasons why this is a bad situation, but one of the reasons why it's specifically bad for the IDF is that their goal. They declared war, so their goal is to eliminate Hamas, to erase them, a de-Hamasification campaign, essentially, right? In order to do that, they can launch airstrikes all day, and they can carpet bomb Gaza. There's a couple of things that are going to prevent them, though. There's an actual limit of civilians that they're going to allow to be able to kill, and that number I don't know what that number is. That number is probably somewhere in the tens of thousands. But if they kill 20,000 people, civilians, which they would do if they kept on knocking down residential places, they're not. The residents of the building have of Gaza have basically told to go to like a couple different evacuation zones, which are schools. These schools are still getting hit.
They actually recently hit one of those refugee camps.
They recently hit one of these these schools. Most families are just in their houses, and they're not getting what the Israelis would typically do when they would bomb Gaza is that they would basically give them a knock. They would say, okay, this building's about to be knocked down. You have about 5 minutes to go before it's knocked down. Like
15 minutes. And sometimes they even called them or sent them text messages and shit and tell them to get the fuck out, which is, I kind of appreciate that, even if it's a tactical like nightmare, but they've suspended that too. That's no longer in effect. Yeah. They're just leveling places now.
So there is a threshold that they're not going to be able to pass, because eventually, because over the next week, we're going to get all these pictures. There's going to be all the video evidence of atrocity. Like it just, there's no escaping it. There's going to be dead children.
Limited window to do some fucked up shit.
There's going to be dead. There's going to be dead children. There's going to be fried corpses. And these are predominantly going to. Gaza is 1 million children. There's 2 million people in Gaza. 1 million of them are children.
2.4, and it's 25 miles tall, 7 miles wide. It's one of the densest populated areas in the world. You are going to kill children, little infants. If you go on Twitter, if you look at any type, that's why this is such a horrible thing to look at, because it's mostly children who are dying. Children who are not Hamas, by the way. So there's going to be a limit of what they can get away with before they'll, since it was such a horrible attack, they have more room than they normally would before there's international pressure for them to wrap it up. But I think once it hits, they can't slaughter 100,000 people. Like that's just not going to, I don't think that the Muslim world would completely lose its mind. There would be a global jihad against them. This is not to undermine the fact that Hamas just murdered people, and they killed children and they took hostages and they fucking murdered so many innocent people as well. But this shouldn't be biblical, right? This isn't an eye for an eye. This is fucking crazy. But like, what are they going to do? And that's the thing that I keep racking my brain over. It's like, okay, they level a building. And if you're on the Israeli side, you say, well, there's probably Hamas there. And also they started it. All right.
There's been one election. So the election of Hamas was in 2006.
7, I think. Actually.
2007, 2006. Yeah. So the little children dying didn't vote for Hamas.
They weren't even alive.
They weren't alive. And then the second thing is they're going to have to, just going back to why this is such a bad situation for the IDF, they're going to have to go in Gaza. I think that really this was very similar 9/11 again, where Osama bin Laden and the architects behind 9/11, their goal was to attack the United States and not destroy us, because they wouldn't be able to come here and destroy us. Mm-hmm. Their goal was to overextend us and bring us into the Middle East so they can harm us there and overextend the empire. That's right. And I think essentially that's kind of what
Gaza did, what Hamas did.
What Hamas did is that they're like, all right, why don't we overextend them? And if we provoke, they're going to have to go in the ground because we're going to be underground.
And now it's guerrilla warfare.
Now this is guerrilla warfare. I mean, the life of somebody in Gaza is so miserable. Since the blockade in 2007, it is so bleak and so miserable and so terrible that most people are like, a lot of young people especially, are like, my life is basically worthless. Like, I have no chance. I have zero opportunities in life. I cannot escape this. It's a true open-air prison. And honestly,
63% of Gaza has food insecurity. Only 10% has access to fresh water. Their power plants can only supply 50%, so they have rolling blackouts. So half of every day has no electricity for them, and everything else is tightly restricted by the Israeli blockade. So only a limited amount of people. I mean, 20,000 people every day used to come in and out of Gaza for work, but that is a drop in the bucket when you think about the 2.4 million people that live there. They have no freedom of motion. They have no freedoms to do anything. They live in absolute destitute. It's fucking sad, and this is for a generation. And what's fucked up about it is that this blockade was a response to what Hamas did years ago. Nevertheless, the majority of this population wasn't even alive for that.
Yeah, and it's
did not participate in that. Didn't even exist, and nevertheless have to pay the price for that, and raises a lot of moral questions about, like, is this form of collective punishment justifiable?
No, it's not justifiable. It's wrong. It's wrong to collectively punish people, especially children. Like, you're irresponsibly murdering kids, and that's why it's so jarring. That's why it's so jarring and disorienting to see people who consider themselves pro-life Christians in America calling for the genocide of children.
Let's for a second entertain the other side, because I want to be fair, and also I want to point out how fucking difficult this is. Hamas exists, period. Even if the majority of the people in Gaza have nothing to do with Hamas and are totally innocent in this, Hamas exists, and they are a threat. And occasionally they send rockets over, and occasionally those rockets hit and hurt people or kill people. And we can argue all day about the justifications of it, or maybe not the justifications, but like the rationale behind it. And we can understand what the motivations behind why they do what they do. At the end of the day, it's still wrong. And what does someone like Israel do about it, right? So, I mean, I think at this point they feel that just thinking about it out loud, they've oppressed these people so hard that it's impossible to just stop oppressing them and expect like everything to be nice and happy.
It's like kind of like the Guantanamo Bay problem, where it's like
it's 100%.
Hey, if these people were like Guantanamo Bay, it's where, hey, even if we lock some people up who weren't terrorists, well, we treated them so poorly, they're definitely terrorists now. It's kind of like that. It's like, well, we've been so cruel to this population over the past 15 years that, I mean, even if they didn't exist, they're definitely going to hate us now. Like, it's
right.
It's
so I mean,
like
what do you
paradigm.
do? What do you do if you're Israel? Like, what do you do to protect your people You know, like we agree that what they're doing is fucked up, right? So that's our starting point.
There's the solution is ending the blockade. Really, I'm not even saying.
I think the very rational fear from the Israeli government and the security forces there would be, if you end the occupation, they're just going to go all out and start murdering innocent people with reckless abandon, and that's a very real possibility,
which is probably true. That's why that's why the situation is just so hopeless. You know, like there's really not any good option for anyone, and it's heartbreaking, man.
Well, I mean, let's talk about this operation, because like when we covered the Russia-Ukraine war, we spent quite a bit of time thinking about not only just the Russian motivation to invade, but the stated goals, the stated and frankly unstated goals of Russia. And in that conflict, you know, the stated goals was to denazify the areas and liberate the Russian sympathizers that lived in the east of Ukraine, right? So what are the stated goals?
To liberate or eliminate? To liberate.
Yes.
No, I mean, Putin's pretty clear about the goals of Russia, you know, to basically get NATO off the doorstep. It's to...
So what are the stated goals here?
The stated goals here, well, what did Hamas say? I don't even think we really have an accurate...
Well, I'm talking about what are Israel's stated goals now.
Israel's stated goals?
Because we know what Hamas wanted to do. They just wanted to wreak terror.
What's the Israeli defense minister just say?
We should probably quote him, because
Let's quote him.
His words on this were pretty...
What did Yoav Gallant say? He said something along the lines... I want to get his quote perfectly, so I'm not paraphrasing it, because...
Right. Yeah, because I think it is important.
It's important to actually use quotes. We are fighting against human animals.
Okay.
Not the full thing, but in the context, he was calling for a complete siege of Gaza.
Yep. He says, I have ordered a complete siege on the Gaza Strip. There will be no electricity, no food, no fuel. Everything is closed. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly, he adds. So I guess some subtext here is, I'm really having trouble finding the full quote here, unfortunately. But I remember from that speech that he stated being their goal or their interest here is to cripple Hamas such that they have no capability to do this again in the future. Which, I mean, reasonable on paper. How are you going to do it though? And I just don't see how they can do it, because I was reading another article, another former Israeli defense minister, whose name I forget, was saying that, they hit Hamas and they blow up a couple buildings and they blow up a few rocket launchers, crush a couple tunnels, and 2 years later they make more, right? So what makes this goal different, And I think, unfortunately, what makes this goal different is this dehumanization of their enemy. We are fighting human animals, and we are acting accordingly. This gives me the indication that this, in addition to the fact that they're completely blockading, they're shutting off the electricity, food, fuel, and everything like that. That is actually illegal by international law, but it's a war, so people are gonna do fucked up things. Anyway, those two things combined, I think, tells me that there are going to be some pretty high prices taken, and they're not going to hit Gaza. They're not going to hit Hamas specifically. It's not possible. A lot of the times, the proponents of Israel doing what they do, leveling buildings and things like that, will say like, "Hey, well, Hamas uses, Palestinians in Gaza as human shields," and that is categorically true. But also,
what it is, it's called urban warfare. It's called all these people are stuck in.
We're talking about a 7 by 25 mile strip of land that's got 2.3 million people. Where the fuck are they going to put their stuff that isn't an immediate, residential area?
Yeah, like there's only so many places to live. Like people live everywhere.
Right. Where would they there's no like field somewhere where they can put all their weapons, and like also why the fuck would they do that? Right? They would be immediately destroyed. Right? So where else would they put their means of defense? It would be like asking, every Texan, like, hey, can you please keep your guns on your front porch?
Well, what they would have to do in order to get Hamas would be something similar to what the Russians did to Mariupol to root out Azov battalion.
Which is?
And they had to go door by door. Mm-hmm. They went door by door, and it was very bad. It was a pretty bloody battle. And
so you're predicting a Mariupol in Gaza?
I'm not predicting that. I don't think it will go that far, but it wouldn't be a Mariupol. It would be something that would be 10 times as big. I think Mariupol's population of like 200,000 at most. It's not a huge, it's a larger city, but it's not like some huge city.
Right.
What's the population of Mariupol? I guess
what was the population of Mariupol?
What was
that
Mariupol?
Shit is different now.
Okay, it's more than 200. It's 446,000 people.
Right, but that's still a fraction of Gaza, and Gaza is much smaller.
Yeah. So they would have to go door to door. It would be intense urban combat, and the Israelis would take heavy casualties. Like, it wouldn't be something where, there'd be 10 casualties. Like some of the other conflicts they've had, they'd probably take hundreds, if not thousands. They've already taken 1,000. Well, according to them.
Civilian casualties. We don't know what the breakdown is for soldiers versus, civilians.
So,
but
I don't know. That's why I think that they're hoping for a short war rather than a long war, and
everybody's hoping for a short war, frankly. But I don't know how you make it. I don't know how you do a short war here, right?
Well, I don't think you do a short war and eliminate Hamas. In order to do that, they'd have to do a long-term, protracted war and take casualties. They'd have to do something similar to what the Russians did in Mariupol.
I'm not sure they're willing to stomach that, because Israel's very much like the U.S. We don't like we don't like any casualties. As a matter of fact, just recently they did a prisoner swap there where they switched one Israeli soldier for like 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, and that's just how they value like the scale of lives there. So if they're willing to say one soldier for 1,000 Palestinians, if they go in and a single soldier dies, they're going to turn around and kill 1,000 to exact that price, if we're talking about that at scale. And speaking of prisoners, I don't think it's very possible for them to go door to door and and just indiscriminately bomb, given the fact that there's something like 250 prisoners right now, hostages.
Yeah.
So they got to deal with that. So they can't just level everything.
Well,
right?
Yeah, they don't know where they are, and they might be operating that these prisoners are already dead, or maybe there's negotiation. I don't know. Again,
I think the Israeli people
there's a large range of
would not accept Israel's decision to just assume that they're all dead and just level all of Gaza. I don't think they would accept that.
But we'll see if they do some sort of prisoner swap. But I guess the larger point I'm trying to make is that I really don't think they would prefer not to have a bunch of, it would destabilize the country, I feel, if there was a lot of killed in action in Gaza, especially since the political environment is so fragmented right now with the right and the left. There was mass protests for months going back at the end of last year. And
let's put some historical context on this. So this is basically the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, right? Pretty much to the day. And it's also why it's an auspicious day for Hamas to have done, the attack. And back in 2013, I got this from the Times of Israel. Back in 2013, Israel released the late prime minister's testimony before the commission on her handling of the 73 war. And in that war, 2,500 Israelis lost their lives, and we're already coming dangerously close to that. And we can imagine that if there's a ground war, which it seems like there are, because they've got about 100,000 troops at the ready, calling up another 300,000 reservists. Sounds like what the fuck else are they going to do with those troops, right? So in that war, and in the aftermath of that war, there was a commission, the Agranat Commission, and Golda Meir, the prime minister at the time, was heavily scrutinized for this. And one of the things that she was scrutinized for was that evidently they had intelligence that there was going to be a strike from Egypt. They apparently knew that it was going to happen, but according to her, there was some hesitation, right? One of the hesitation was that, if they did a preemptive strike on the Suez, on the western side of the Suez Canal, which is where the Egyptian troops were amassing before this fight, that, the U.S. wasn't going to come out and help them because they shot the first shot, which is a very real issue. Another one was that she believed that, their soldiers would be able to handle it. But the outcome of all of this is that a year later, she resigned. I think because she was about to get kicked out anyway. So, we're going to see Bibi come through, still be the prime minister after this, especially given the fact that there's a lot of questions circling right now about how much they knew and why they weren't able to stop it and how they didn't notice the fucking paragliders.
Well, I will say this. It's you can blame, he can escape blame for immediate intelligence failures, but it's just kind of like the larger political move that he's made, aligning with the far right in Israel, aligning with the settler parties. The settler issue is one of the primary issues, which is drawing so much antagonism, and honestly, the settler issue is what's making what ultimately should be the goal. I think I'm more of a, I think there should be a 2-state solution. You're more of a 1-state solution person, right?
Yeah, one state where they all live and fucking.
See, I don't think that's possible. I don't think that's possible. Like, I don't think
a 2-state solution is possible.
Yeah, exactly. Touche, because the 2 states, I thought the 2-state solution could be possible, but the settler issue just carves up everything into Swiss cheese. They'd have to concede a significant amount of land to, a Palestinian state to connect Gaza and the West Bank. That would be the only way that you could do it. They'd also have to allow
Palestine as a whole, as the second state, to self-determination, meaning, and I mean that in the truest sense, meaning controlling their own borders, having their own economy, having their own government, and having their own military. And that's just not an acceptable term for Israel.
Well, I mean, what they're hoping is just to have, the Palestinian Authority is basically just like your typical corrupt Arab state, like any other state. Mm-hmm. They just want to keep that, you know what I mean? Right. Maybe that's what a future Palestinian state would look like, just another corrupt Arab state. But if they didn't have the settler issue, a 2-state solution would be possible, viable. And that would be I think that would be obviously it's not perfect, but there's no way there can be a 1-state solution. Especially, the stated goal of Israel is to be essentially a safe haven for Jews and to maintain a Jewish demographic. That would dilute the Jewish demographic there
in half. In literal half, yeah. There's about as many.
What's the point of having Israel then if it's not going to be a Jewish state? And
I don't believe in ethno states. So
yeah, I don't believe in ethno states either. But that's the goal of it. And here's kind of like the larger tragedy, I feel. And you just got to go back to the Zionist movement. The state of Israel was supposed to be a safe haven for Jews, given the atrocities of not only the 20th century, but of the late 19th century as well, with the pogroms and all of that. And it was supposed to be a safe haven for Jews. And now it's the least, I mean, objectively, Israel is the least safest place for Jews in the world.
They're better off in Brooklyn.
They're better off anywhere. It is the most dangerous place for Jews in the world. And it's just, it's the tragedy of what Zionism is, or what it has
I was
become.
reading a lot about like the Zionists just in preparation for the show, and I'm reminded again that Theodor Herzl, the modern founder of Zionism, his idea was to solve the Jewish issue in Europe was to create a colony in Palestine, written in the documentation. So, I mean, you can think of that very positively, right? Like, and say it's very supportive of Jewish plight and having them return to their homeland, and for what that's worth. You could also read that as very anti-Semitic in the first place, right? Like, here's a way to get rid of our Jewish problem: kick them all out, or give them the choice to leave.
What, Theodor Herzl?
Yeah.
Well, Theodor Herzl is a Jew.
No, I know, but a lot of the European leaders who signed on to this were inherently anti-Semitic, especially the folks in fucking Great Britain. I mean, the Balfour Declaration is inherently fucking. It's got tinges of racism.
The goal with the British Empire, with the early Zionists, was economic. Really, I mean, they saw that as they were like, well, if the Jewish populations of Europe colonize Palestine, then they're going to economically develop it. And Palestine's a valuable area. It's close to the Suez Canal. Like, that was the reason why the British pushed for it, was to create like an economic prosperity zone. To bring up the economic prosperity zone from last episode. But I mean, that was essentially what was the primary motive behind it. I don't know how much it had to do with like getting rid of their Jews, but maybe some countries it was. But for the British, they were looking at it in dollar signs, really.
Yeah, there's still there were still so many Christian Zionists who were supporting this for like theologic reasons, right? They're
it's crazy, man. That's
and then there was a lot of right wing nationalists in Europe that were in support of this for a number of reasons. One of them because they didn't like the Jews, and that sounded like a really good idea, right, for them to just leave. Another one was that because they looked at Israel as being, an ethno-state example, so that they could use it as a model for their own ethno-states. And even Herzl himself, acknowledged that a lot of the support that he was getting in Europe had a lot of that backgrounds, but it was justified in the sense that they all shared the basic aim of getting the Jewish diaspora relocated to Palestine.
We could talk about this all day because it's an interesting topic, but I do want to touch on this before we wrap up.
Okay.
And it is the larger geopolitical scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Because
let's cover that.
This is the scariest part about it. It's like the implications of creating a larger war. Now, so going back to what I think the goal of Hamas was to ultimately provoke the Israelis into a quagmire in Gaza. And one of, I guess, potential outcomes, if there's a human catastrophe, which very likely there's going to be. I mean, there's already been one over the past couple of days, and you can imagine over the following week or weeks, there's going to be a lot of bloodshed. This is most likely, and it has already, it's complicated any type of detente with Israel and Saudi Arabia. I think that, and this is kind of like what I've read Israelis are saying, is that, they did this now to kind of throw a fork into our relationship with Saudi Arabia, us normalizing relations with them, and also in response to like the Abraham Accords. I think what they are essentially want is to make it impossible for any Muslim government to have a normalized relationship with Israel. I mean, that would be the first goal. Secondary goal would be, all right, we not only want that, but we want we want it so that Muslim governments have to at least publicly support us. They can't turn a blind eye anymore to the Palestinian plight. I mean, enough. If you like poll Muslim populations in the Middle East, especially, it's the polling could be considered anti-Semitic. I'll just put it that way. The populations are largely very anti-Israel.
So I want to talk about the implication of undermining the normalization of Arab states with Israel, because I'm hearing that a lot. And I don't know why that just doesn't sit super well as like a valid theory for me. So I'll just spitball out loud because I still haven't formed a cohesive opinion on this. I think it's totally possible that part of this is Palestinian fear that a normalization with, say, Saudi Arabia would undermine their ability to get freedom because they'd effectively be losing a partner. But it's not as though Saudi Arabia was like helpful to Hamas in any, or Gaza or the Palestinians in any material way, in any meaningful way, right? After all the wars in the past, like after fucking Israel just spanked the shit out of all of their Arab neighbors, the rest of the Arab world has just been really quiet about this issue. So I just can't see how this is a primary issue for Hamas right now. I just can't see it. Now, I can see it vis-a-vis the proxy of Iran, right? Because Iran doesn't like Saudi Arabia, and Iran doesn't like Israel, and it definitely doesn't want them to team up and be against Iran.
Well, Iran and Saudi Arabia are normalizing their relationships, and that undermines that undermines it even further. So, like, how would Iran benefit if they're normalizing relationships with Saudi Arabia? How would they benefit by undermining this other normalization? Because they're isolating Israel. That would be the benefit. So
I don't know.
So the goal is to completely isolate Israel from any allies in the Middle East. So it's taboo to support Israel. That's basically.
But how does that functionally help Hamas right now?
Well, it makes the state weaker and puts them more in a corner. It doesn't functionally set Gaza free, but it puts the state in a corner.
Which is kind of like, if I'm Hamas, I'm like, I'm sure they're privy to the geopolitical situation too. I don't think they're stupid. I'm thinking,
no, of course they're
not. I'm not going to fight this war because Iran thinks it's a good idea. I'm going to fight this war because I feel like I'm being oppressed. And I think that the discussion around this being an Iranian proxy war that is set up to undermine the normalization of Israel and Saudi Arabia is just it's like saying that this is a fight between Muslims and Jews. It's so superficial, and like maybe a little bit has to do with it, but it's like that's not the point.
No, that's not that's not the point. That's not the primary goal of Hamas. But it's one of the ways that you can essentially, it's kind of death by a million cuts type thing, or 1,000 cuts.
For sure.
But I think it's more along the lines of bringing in the larger Muslim world to their support by provoking some sort of atrocity in Gaza. I think that could be a motive, which is a pretty Machiavellian motive. But going back to when we were talking about just like how Hamas is financed, most of their they get most of their aid from like black market like Islamist groups. What's really interesting too is that kind of if Hamas kind of aligned with anyone, it'd be more of like the Muslim Brotherhood type organizations. Mm-hmm. Hamas was on basically Israel's side during the Syrian war, because Hamas was on the anti-Assad. They were on the anti-Assad groups, not the pro-Assad groups.
Right, but because Assad is a secularist.
Yeah. They took, and they're Sunnis too. So, they took the plight of the Sunni And but honestly, the Sunni Shiite divide in certain places in the Middle East is not as important anymore. I mean, where it's most important is, Saudi Arabia, the Shia are discriminated pretty bad. But in Iraq is probably where you have Iraq is basically the Germany of the Middle East, where it's the historic Germany, in the sense it was historically very fractured. Iraq has it had really the bloodiest religious war out of any of the Middle Eastern states between Sunnis and Shia. That's still an issue there, but that's becoming less and less of an issue between larger Shia governments and Sunni governments with their relationships with each other. And you can see that because, for example, Iran and Azerbaijan are not on the best of terms because, Iran was taking Armenia's side, at the Nagorno-Karabakh side in the war against Azerbaijan. Mm-hmm. On the flip side, you have so that's Shia on Shia versus Shia. Azerbaijan's a Shia state. Then you have organizations like Hezbollah, which is they're 12er Shia, which is the same sect as Iran. It seems like they're working with Hamas. They're obviously working with Hamas, and I think Hezbollah has stated that their primary goal is that they'll do whatever they can to not let Gaza fall.
Well, they came out and supported Hamas. I think that was just today, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, they're applying pressure. I don't think that. So, I read this guy Jacob Dreisen, who's an Israeli, or he was born in Israel, but he's an Army veteran in the U.S. And he was writing, he basically was writing that and a lot of analysts have alluded to this. If Hezbollah gets involved in the war, then it would be a major issue for the Israelis, and there would have to be an intervention to save the state.
Well, they've already dipped their toes in it. Just literally today.
There would have to be a U.S. intervention to save the state, or if there would have to be the Israelis would have to use a nuclear weapon on Lebanon.
They've already dipped their toes in this. Hezbollah, they just recently did some rocket and artillery fire onto 3 military outposts in the Sheba Farms, which is like the disputed Golan Heights area. And they said it was in solidarity with the Palestinian people, and the Israeli military fired a bunch of artillery and did a bunch of air raids on areas in southern Lebanon, just across that blue line, which is where the Israelis pulled out after their war in 2000. So they're already fighting small scale,
but they're fighting on a small scale right now. If that conflict widens, that's the scariest situation, because then there's going to be pressure for the U.S. to take retaliation measures against Hezbollah. That would draw the U.S. into a conflict with Iran. And honestly, just if the U.S. enters a war with Iran, it would start off by being going after nuclear infrastructure, their refineries, but to remove the Ayatollah from power, that would have to be another, they'd have to go in and physically remove them from power. They wouldn't be able to bomb them. They're in the mountains, this is a lot. Iran's terrain is a lot different than Iraq's terrain. And also it has, more than double the population. Iran has 90 million people. I don't think it's a porcupine. You wouldn't be able, it would be impossible to swallow. I don't think you can even, if there was a 3 million man army and we were all right, we have a massive agenda to overthrow the regime of Iran. Maybe that we could do it, but we would take tons of casualties. And I think it would be, we just spoke about the the Russo-Japanese War and how that was kind of like
an embarrassment for Russia,
a national embarrassment for Russia, and was really the death throw of the Russian Empire. I think that would be similar to the United States. I think that would be.
I think Iran would definitely give us a black eye. We wouldn't be prepared for that.
It would be a horrible cost, and I think it would almost, the political instability that would cause in the U.S., I think would rip the country apart. Like, I think it would be the end of the United States if we get into a war with either China over Taiwan or Iran. I think both of those we can't do.
Well, I mean, hopefully Lebanon, or much more specifically Hezbollah, keeps quiet and doesn't attack any further.
I think they're just going to kind of play the game of putting pressure on them. I don't think that they're going to.
Yeah. Also, I hope
there's too much the risk, because they'll be wiped out.
Israel doesn't get any bright ideas about maybe doing preemptive strikes against Hezbollah targets, as that would,
I'm sure that they will do preemptive strikes, but it's just like
it would escalate the situation.
Like what would the escalation be? Like, I don't know. Hopefully there's none.
Like, for right now, Israel responded to the attacks on that farm, the Sheba farms. And that makes sense, right? I'm not really blaming them at all for doing that. But if they decided, like, hey, let's strike further in because we're worried that Hezbollah is going to continue attacking, I think Hezbollah would probably rightly understand that as a declaration of war, and perhaps, more seriously get into it, which, to all the points that you said, would very likely bring in Iran and the U.S. maybe. I mean, Biden sent in a carrier strike group to tell everybody to shut the fuck up. I mean, let's see if that makes an impact.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Definitely kind of I don't know if it was for Gaza or if it was for.
It was, the stated reason was to make sure that nobody else fucks around.
I think one of the reasons was to make sure that there was no more funding from Iran. We need to stop Iran from funding them. It's all Iran's fault.
Were they like Venmoing them? Like,
they're Venmoing them. We need to put a stop to Venmo.
Like, I just don't understand how much more they can. How much more they
you
can
have
do
to
right
physically.
now.
You have to get physical materials in there,
right?
Exactly.
It's not. That's what I'm saying.
It's not like you can give them money. It's like, here's $20. Like, it's not like
even
they're
if
gonna
they give them money. Like, they need weapons.
They need shit. They need physical things that they can construct and make.
Right, and they're not going to get that right now because there's a full-on blockade right now. Seems like Egypt's pretty compliant with it too. So
yeah, well, it's a difficult situation, in the words of James Gandolfini or Tony Soprano. It's a difficult situation. All right, we want to wrap this up.
Yeah, man.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening to another episode. If you want to rate and review the podcast, that is the number one way to support our show. You can also join us on Patreon, where you get access to our Slack. Anything else you want to add?
No, man.
All right. Peace, guys.
Peace.